Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this second half of our interview with Mary Elizabeth Hurd, who practices bankruptcy law at Grable Martin, our law firm. In this episode, we pick up the conversation talking about restructuring a company's capitalization prior to bankruptcy. We hope you enjoy the interview. Welcome to Alt Investing Made Easy, where we explore the complex world of alternative assets. I'm Roland, a securities attorney, investment advisor, and your co-host.
And I'm Sarah, an investment advisor and corporate attorney, and your other co-host. We'll guide you through real estate, private equity, and more, making complex topics accessible.
Tune in for insights that empower your financial journey.
Let's make alt investing easy, one episode at a time.
So the analogy kind of in the disclosure side of what you were talking about in your last episode and the disclosure side in a bankruptcy case is that you can do restructuring work before you actually file the petition that makes the judge get involved, right? Because once the judge is involved and all the other parties, the U.S. trustee is an arm of the Department of Justice, they're involved. Everybody's got lawyers, there's 100 lawyers or whatever, and you're going to be under the scrutiny of that process, and you have to ask permission in the same way that you have to disclose. I mean, it's sort of an analogy in a public company situation. And that's true whether you are a public company filing for bankruptcy or an individual.
Which actually probably overall gives integrity to the bankruptcy process, right?
But
isn't there a word for that when you start planning in advance, knowing problems are coming? And it's called a prepack. You make arrangements as best you can.
Right.
And then, is that what a prepack is, or are we talking about something different?
So I gave you kind of the synopsis of what happens in a bankruptcy case, just that you file this petition, lots of things happen, and then the goal is to get to the confirming of the plan, which is a new contract with everyone. A prepack is a type of bankruptcy plan or process, essentially, where let's say you're having, I mean, obviously you should be talking to your lenders and having these really hard conversations and not just bankruptcy out of the blue, right?
Right.
The best possible opportunity, usually, to restructure your debt is going to be outside of the bankruptcy process. What the bankruptcy does is the concept of an automatic stay. So if you're facing a foreclosure, you're facing some kind of an event that's coming, you're not going to be able to make payroll. A judgment, you're in a lawsuit and you're facing a judgment being entered any day now. What it does is it stops all of that, and everybody's got to come to the bankruptcy court, or there's really big penalties if you don't follow these rules. Now, on a prepack, essentially what you're doing is you're negotiating with all your lenders in the capital stack, right? So you're talking to your secured lenders that have a deed of trust or some form of a security interest, mortgage, in your whatever it is that you gave up for the loan. And then you've got, again, all the way down the capital stack. You might be facing a maturity on one of those loans, or you might be facing a maturity on, you can have bonds, you can have notes, you can have fixed rate notes, you can have floating rate notes, and maybe you're really concerned about the interest rate environment, and soon you're going to be on the hook for another $10 million or what have you based on the terms of the note. So the hope is that you can get all of this worked out with your lenders and your owners and management, and then you write that all down and you file it with the court and seek immediate is a strong word, but approval of that plan on a very short expedited notice. There was actually a case in the Southern District of Texas, it's been in the last 5 years, where a judge approved a bankruptcy plan in the same day as the case having been filed. That's highly unusual, and to some extent, there's some criticism there for a variety of reasons from
Right,
creditor
right.
side. But the point is, if you've got everybody on board with the deal and you can find everyone, which of course is very difficult to do in a public company with shareholders, but in a smaller company, if you can get everybody on board with the deal and sign the deal, but for example, if you need to issue new shares, you might need to go through the bankruptcy process to do that. There may be a benefit to having that automatic stay in place, or what we're going to talk about in a minute, the elimination of certain liens through a 363 sale.
Exactly.
In order to go through the process rather than just staying in the world of out-of-court restructurings.
So, Mary Elizabeth, one of the things that was really interesting when we first met, you said, "Hey, it's so great to be part of a firm with some corporate attorneys. Let's create a restructuring practice."
Sure.
And it just sounded like it was really sophisticated work that would allow us to garner probably higher wages and still be, hourly rate and still be really competitive with the other people that are doing that. And so that always fascinated me, you know. But anyway, could you just describe to us a little bit about what the term restructuring is?
Sure, Roland, I'd be happy to do that. So we've been talking a lot about bankruptcy, but restructuring is larger than bankruptcy. So when you hear the word restructuring, you are kind of like, is this bad too? No, not necessarily. So restructuring just means reorganizing your debt, reorganizing the structure of your company sometimes. Sometimes it involves potentially selling off a part of your company or moving employees to a different sector of your company. And sometimes it does, if the reason for the restructuring is because of a huge loss or a big, a problem with paying off the debt that you already have, it can mean a reduction in force. You also hear people when an employee says, "Oh, well, they're doing a restructuring at my company." So it's a term that scares people, just like bankruptcy. But it's often, again, going back to your idea of democratization of capital and of that American policy, both legal and in other ways, just public policy, favors American innovation. And so when you're doing a restructuring, a bankruptcy can be included in a restructuring, but most companies are going to start with going to their lawyers and going to their lenders, typically through their lawyers, to try and work out whatever the problem is without having to file for bankruptcy. So bankruptcy can be a choice that is sort of in the array of choices that would help you fix whatever the problem is. But a lot of people, and when I say people, I mean companies, a lot of companies don't want to go the bankruptcy process because the bankruptcy process is going to be public. In this country, we have an open court system. If you file something in a court, most of the time, there are ways to seal pleadings, but most of the time, it's going to be visible to the public, okay? The news is going to pick up on your company's filed bankruptcy, all of these things, all right? So most companies try to, there's a number of attempts to work with the lenders and somehow find a way to either sell things or give different collateral or reduce the interest rate or kick out a maturity date. Those are the typical problems, right? And so you're only having to go to the bankruptcy court if you need perhaps the benefit of the automatic stay, which is an automatic stay, just to give you a better word for it, is an injunction. And the word injunction in law speak means do not do anything without asking the court's permission. Okay. So a restructuring practice, for example, you're going to be touching not just bankruptcy lawyers. You're going to need securities lawyers, corporate lawyers, employment lawyers. If it's a smaller business, you may need estate planning lawyers. If it's a closely held business, you might need to bring in litigators who or lawyers who specialize in any kind of fiduciary duty responsibilities.
As you start saying that, I just start thinking expenses, adding up, right?
Right. But typically a bankruptcy case is more expensive.
Which is a motivator for restructuring. I think also it's a motivator for your creditors and even your, investors to all participate, as much as possible in a restructuring process, because ultimately even creditors can lose in the end, right? Even secured creditors may not even, may have to take a haircut on what they have, and it can get really complex from what I understand. So there's a lot of interest in trying to resolve problems before you get to court.
That's right. So in for example, in the 2007, late 07 through about, I don't know, 12 or 13, whatever we're calling the Great Recession, and then the sort of fallout after that. I know the Great Recession was shorter than that, but there was continual fallout and continual bankruptcies and restructurings after that. One of the things that happened was that everyone's real estate was way overvalued.
Right, exactly.
And so as the property valuations came down in this just huge crash, came down is probably the wrong phrase. The reality is everyone suddenly became aware that the valuations were inflated.
Right.
So in that situation, we use the term underwater. Remember, everyone was underwater.
The world over, everybody was underwater.
Everyone was underwater on their mortgage, which meant in that context, I owe the bank more than the value of this house. So what are we going to do now?
And you're breaching your loan to value problem. You have a loan to value
that's
problem.
Right.
And other covenants you're probably breaching.
Right. Any non-material, it's just a nightmare. And we can get into that in another topic. But the point is, yes, you're right. Even a secured creditor, even taxing creditors can't took a haircut.
Right.
And then, any unsecured debt, you remember hearing about people who just basically left their homes and left the keys on the counter.
Well, I remember because I was abroad at the time. This was the time I worked on my one major restructuring project, which took over 2 years and had like $2 billion of debt and 25 banks involved. And the process of restructuring took a long time. But what was so interesting is that it succeeded ultimately because nobody wanted to go to bankruptcy.
Right.
And so all these banks stayed in the process, and the costs were incredible even for the restructuring process. But it was ultimately triggered, the world over. I think that was, bankruptcy courts were busy all over the world during that period because of this sudden discovery of the inflated prices on properties.
Right. And so one of the things, I feel like we've been talking about all this stuff that I started the talk with, bankruptcy isn't bad. None of this bad.
Now we're talking, it sounds bad, but actually.
No, it sounds bad again.
I think what bringing back to your point, imagine the absence of a process for it.
Right.
And that's what bad is when you have all these same problems and no process to find your way out of it. And so what happens in my experience, what I've seen abroad is, if there's not a sound bankruptcy process, then literally things just stay stagnant. And so a lot of economic vibrancy fizzles out and that means no innovation. And this is why it's so critical to have a process like bankruptcy. And it's interesting because we're talking to our investor clients, and we're talking to the promoters of deals and different clients that we have who are people who are interested in alternative investments. Mm-hmm. And the reason I really wanted to have this talk with you is because I think the way to go about being a sophisticated, smart, and I don't mean that in the technical sense, a smart investor in anything, but especially in private companies, is to understand fundamentally what the belly side of things looks like, really.
Right.
Because then you can actually take educated decisions about what you're doing. Right. And then if things happen, you don't have to be afraid because you know what's happening, or you know that there's a process for it.
That's right. And just to point out how important the American bankruptcy system has been. So we've got, slight detour for 1 second. We get most of our law from the English. Okay, makes sense. We get some of it from the Spanish, the idea of the mineral estate and all that. But the English, in contrast, have a really only a liquidation and what they call an administration, process.
Yeah.
And then now that the American system, I can't remember exactly when they changed this. It's probably been about 20 years now. They have created something called a Chapter 15. And I think your audience should know about that. I'd sort of forgotten about that earlier. But a Chapter 15 process allows for a bankruptcy in another country.
Right.
So if you have a plant or a foundry or a factory, you have operations in various countries, sometimes what you can do, I mean, a lot of that can be administered through the American bankruptcy, but they also can be administered by filing a separate case in some of these other countries. And India is one of the countries that's currently revamping and sort of looking at more of the reorganization concept because it's been so beneficial in this country. And the other thing that I want to make sure I talk about is one of the good things about bankruptcy. Okay?
Right. Let's come back to the good things. There's so many things to talk about. And so in a sense, this is our introduction to bankruptcy, right? And we hope that, our audience can see how much you know and how much experience you have. And so there's, I think, a lot of different topics we can get into over time. So obviously we'll get to talk to you more and more about different topics as they come up. But for today, I think you're looking at me like you have something to say.
No, I was going to really just invite you to continue. But, what were you going to talk about?
Oh, sure. So the one thing I wanted to talk to you about that I would be loath to forget here is the concept of doing a sale in a bankruptcy case. Okay, so let's talk, again, we're just talking about businesses, not individuals, but in the context of a bankruptcy, you can do a sale. You can do it in a pre-pack, but let's keep it simple. I'm talking about what colloquially what we call a straight bankruptcy means you file and then you get through all of these things and you get to the plan, right? There's also an idea of a free fall bankruptcy, which is sort of we file and sort of scream, what do we do? Okay. Well, most companies have an idea, generally speaking, of what they want to do at a minimum when they are going through the bankruptcy process. It's not just to stop a deadline. Sometimes it can be to stop a deadline for a receivership being appointed, a receiver being appointed, or a judgment being entered. Some of the examples I gave you before.
Right.
Sometimes you've got a valuable asset or a valuable enterprise that you would like to reorganize some of the, issues with debt or employees or contracts, and we can talk more about getting rid of bad contracts later. But there's this idea of having a sale in a bankruptcy, and this is extremely attractive and one of the reasons why people often file bankruptcy or want to know about companies that have filed for bankruptcy. So we use the term 363. 363 is just the provision in the bankruptcy code that applies to a particular sale process.
Right.
There's a lot of that in the bankruptcy code. So the creditor meeting is discussed in provision 341, for example.
Right.
So we call that the 341 meeting.
Right.
I had a client one time ask me, I had put in an engagement letter that, I would be attending, one of the tasks would be attending the 341 meeting. And he said, why do you need to go to 341 meetings and bill me for that?
It's a fair point.
And I thought oh my gosh,
if you didn't know.
I need to rewrite this section because I can totally see how you saw that, misunderstood it. Anyway, so a 363 sale, the basic definition is that you get to sell a property free and clear of liens. Okay. And you've got to go through certain processes in order to achieve the goal of getting the court order saying that. But the great thing about a 363 sale that I pitch to potential clients or current clients is that you're getting the cleanest title available under U.S. law. You're getting an order from a federal court that, of course, you can file in the in the property records, right? The county records, that essentially says there are no liens attached to this. There are no interests. Nobody can show up in a couple of years and say, hey, my grandmother's fence was on this side or whatever. There are no claims.
Oh, wow.
It is, and it actually even in theory can wipe out tax claims. So now, of course, property taxes you get every year. So, I mean, you're going to continue to have liens, but it can wipe out even those.
Right.
So usually the property taxing authorities are paying attention and they're going to make sure they get paid. But the point of all this is that you're not going to have any surprises, right? So you're not going to have anyone filing a lawsuit or making any kind of a claim over something that happened in the past, but no one knew about, right? It's over.
So you really reduce your risk that way.
You greatly reduce your risk. So I have a lot of clients come to me either on the business side, the business folks will call me, or lawyers, or other lawyers will call me on behalf of their clients saying, hey, we really like that property in Austin. Or we really like that property in Houston. Or, hey, Mary Elizabeth, I know you lived in California for a while. Do you know San Francisco? Yeah, I live in San Francisco. Well, what do you think about this this corner?
Right.
I had a client about, well, I think it was in about 2011 or 2012, hire me to go scope out various properties in Sonoma County.
Nice.
Right. Well, there was a time right after the big crash in the Great Recession where property values were extremely low. And we're going to talk about distressed asset sales in a bit. But a 363 sale, essentially, you go through, it's a court process, you file a motion, you have a hearing, all that. Okay. But sometimes you can even come to a bankruptcy case purely, a business can file a bankruptcy with this goal of selling the property free and clear of liens being the objective.
Right.
So you can organize, if you want, what we call a stalking horse bidder. So there's an auction process that you can do in bankruptcy. It's not typically held in front of the judge. It's typically held in someone's office in a tall building somewhere, but it can be. Every now and then the judge wants to supervise the sale, but or the auction process. But essentially, you have someone out there who does their due diligence either before the petition is filed or during the bankruptcy if the decision is made to conduct the sale later. They do their diligence. They decide that they want this property, offer an acceptance. You've got a purchase and sale agreement. And that person, but let's say there's still some more interest in the property. Or let's say that price only takes out the debt and doesn't provide a lot of upside for equity. And so everybody's kind of thinking, is this the best deal we can get? Maybe we can get a better deal, right? So you can, and again, you've got to go through the court to do this. So you can go through having this stalking horse bidder. And the stalking horse bidder is the one that you've got the deal with. That person is going to be aware that we're going to go to this auction process.
Right.
And so they negotiate a pretty hefty breakup fee. And so what that means is if we go to the auction and other folks show up and that original bidder, the stalking horse bidder, gets outbid, then they're going to be paid for their time, right? So there's
so
that.
So it's kind of like creates your floor.
Right, exactly. It creates your floor, but there's an incentive for them to actually close the deal, right? To sign the paperwork.
Right, exactly.
And that this isn't going to be a waste of their time. They spent all this time putting together a letter of intent, and getting, financial statements together, whatever the requirements are. And those are all decided by, those are all negotiable, those concerns. But the point is, then you go to an auction, and I'm going to give you an example here in Austin that people have seen in the news. But you go to the auction, and then let's say they get overbid, then they get paid for their time. But the benefit to the debtor in the case is immense, obviously.
Well, yes.
The court loves an auction. If you ask a judge, they always love an auction because the more money that comes in, the more creditors get paid. The unsecured debt gets paid. And so the lender loves the auction because they know for sure that somebody out there is going to pay, right? Or that's the hope. I guess maybe the buyer doesn't love the auction because if they really want the property, they keep having to
future
go
investors
higher.
in the property sounds like would also love the auction.
That's right.
Because, maybe not the original investors, but other investors who might be interested in a project that included that property. Well, then you have a pretty clear process for how to have access to certain assets that maybe don't come onto the market in other ways.
That's right. That's right. Because things move so quickly in a bankruptcy. You might start a bankruptcy case and not realize that you're going to sell something, and then either the market improves for this particular part of the business or the particular real estate. And I've been talking about this in the context of real estate because that's just the easiest way to understand it. But you can also sell personal property, equipment, or the whole enterprise through a bankruptcy case. But the example I was thinking of is here in Austin. You guys probably remember when we were in college, there was this fabulous deli at 6th and Rio Grande called Katz's.
Right.
And Katz's never closes was the slogan. And I spent many a night there at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning eating a big plate of, I don't know. I feel like I used to get a bagel with
pastrami
applesauce.
I remember bagels with lots of different stuff on them. Yeah.
Right. And it was just the best. So anyway, they closed maybe when we were in law school. I honestly haven't kept track. And then an affiliate of a client of mine actually bought that property at some point in the last 10 years. And they went through the bankruptcy process for their own reasons. And this single asset entity, I'd be wrong if I guessed, but I'm going to say it was called 6th and Rio Grande LLC or something like that.
Right.
That company then had a buyer for the property.
Right.
And they did this auction process, and ultimately the buyer who showed up, and they went through the whole overbidding, and everybody's outbidding each other, and the ultimate buyer wound up being I think the owner of the original Katz's son. And so now the property is back in the hands of
that's interesting.
of the family, which is super cool, right?
Yeah.
For Austin's
ethos,
right? I'm like ethos, pathos. I don't know. So anyway, the great thing about the bankruptcy process is you can put off your the lenders, what we used to call, I think during the Depression, was this idea of the wolf at the door, right? They're there to get their money.
Right.
And I actually have a painting my grandmother did in, I think, the 50s of a wolf at the door, right? Just kind of an interesting American colloquialism, right? So you can put off the wolf at the door, and you can get everything together, get your head on straight, figure out what the crux of the problem is,
right,
and then go on to sell the property. And during that process, you'll have really a fulsome marketing process. It differs. You may have, brokers involved, advertising campaign, whatever. Okay, all of that can be done. Depends on what you want to spend. And then ultimately, we have this great result. So that's an example of a wonderful 363 sale auction process coming out on the end with a great result. The other thing, just so you know, and you're audience knows, is that a sale can be contemplated just in a plan. We don't have, you can say, we're going to go on and sell the property after confirmation, and that's fine too.
Okay.
So in that situation, after
If you have a
confirmation,
buyer,
if you
yeah.
have court approval, no, you don't even have to have a buyer. It can just be that the court has approved that you're going to sell the property
Okay.
in however many days. And so that the great thing about the bankruptcy process, the last thing I want to make sure to drive home, is that it's an extremely creative process.
Right. It sounds like really interesting, doesn't it?
Right. So as long
Kind of
as
like
you
on structuring the investments in the first place.
right, as long so you guys get to do, and I hope I get to join you at some point. By the way, you guys get to do the sort of birth of the company, right?
Right.
Everyone is sort of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then super excited about whatever product or service they're going to do. Okay, and then I'm like, everyone sort of says, oh, I'm the guy or the lady in the like dark hood walking with the
Grim Reaper.
The Grim Reaper, right? But it's not that way.
No, it's more like the Phoenix Rising. Were we
That's
talking about that
right.
yesterday?
That's right. It's more of a
She's like
it's more of a rebirth
Fox from Harry
process.
Potter.
Right, right. It's I used to tell people that I do bankruptcy work, and I also do real estate work, and the transactional side we can do also at Grable Martin. And so I always say that my partners and we do cradle to grave and rebirth. Okay, so
like
we can
that.
That's awesome.
we can cover it all.
We can cover it all.
And for a very reasonable price point. As just a little plug about our firm services,
Yeah.
you're getting entrepreneurs, you're getting people with at least 15 years of experience.
Across the board.
All the partners have at least 15 years of experience. Some of them have 30 years plus.
Some of them practiced in the last century.
right. And you get former big law, former big tex law, and a lot of people who are former general counsels, all for a fraction of what you're going to pay if you hire big law.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mary Elizabeth. It's, like I've said before, every time we talk, I learn something else, and that's after many years working with, in this field, in this area. So, and we look forward to having you back. So
thank you. I would love to come back, and you're very welcome. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Alt Investing Made Easy.
Remember, everyone, take aim with your alternative investing strategies.